A new Leger poll shows that when asked about federal spending, about 45% of Canadians want the government to spend less. The poll, which shows that only 20% of Canadians want the government to spend more and 19% of Canadians want the spending to remain the same, comes on the heels of some loft financial promises from the Carney government. One organization that is beating the drum on the issue of federal spending is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And I'm now joined by their national director, Franco Terrazzano. Franco, thanks for being with me today.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Now, were you surprised with the results of this poll?
Well, I think what the poll shows is that by a very wide margin, Canadians want the federal government to cut spending, right? Canadians know that they're paying way too much tax because the federal government wastes way too much money. I mean, look, the poll gave Canadians three options: cut federal spending, maintain, or increase it. And 45% of Canadians said cut spending, right? Only 20% said increase it, and 19% said maintain it. But if you remove the undecideds from that poll, the numbers go up even further, where 54% of Canadians want the federal government to cut spending. And it all boils down to this: Canadians know that they are not getting good value for the money the federal government is spending, and taxes are going up way too much.
And what do you think this tells us about how Canadians are feeling about the federal spending?
Well, it says federal spending has gone up way too much. I mean, look, over the last 5 years, the federal government has increased spending by 26%, even after adjusting for inflation. So spending has gone up way too much. Now, the problem that we're seeing from the early days of the Carney government is this. So during the election, Mr. Carney told Canadians that he would start to rein in spending. However, we just saw the main estimates, right? The government's main spending plan. And while the government is deciding to increase spending up to $488 billion this year, which is an 8.4% increase over last year's spending. So it's still early days, but it looks like Carney is going to continue Trudeau's debt-fueled spending spree.
And there seems to be an appetite for the government to spend less, but do we have any idea on what Canadians want to be cut?
Well, I think, look, these politicians in Ottawa, they got to start with the little things first, right? Like, let's not forget that the federal government spent $8 million building a barn at Rideau Hall, right? Like, I'm not an expert when it comes to farming, but I'm pretty sure my buddies back in Brooks know how to build a barn for a lot less than $8 million. But then the government has to do the big things right as well. And right now we're not seeing it. Like today, Canadians are paying for 99,000 more federal bureaucrats than what they were just 10 years ago. The cost of the bureaucracy has exploded 73% since 2016. And I think it's a pretty good bet that if you ask most Canadians if they're getting 73% better services from the federal government, that answer would be a big fat no.
Now, we've heard some big promises from the Carney government lately on housing, healthcare, green infrastructure. Are these areas where you think cuts should be made, or is there a problem elsewhere?
Well, let me just say that, after about a decade of runaway spending, finding savings in every single area of the budget should be like finding water in the ocean, right? But what we really have to see is some prioritization, right? The government just can't go along spending more money on everything forever. If the new government has some new priorities and wants to spend money in one area of the budget, they have to be able to find savings in another area of the budget. Because, look, folks, interest charges on the debt are blowing a $1 billion hole in the budget every single week. It's reckless and it's unsustainable and it's unaffordable for taxpayers.
And what area of the budget do you think that the government should firstly be focusing on?
Well, I mentioned the ballooning bureaucracy, right? It's about half of the government's day-to-day spending, and it's a reason that it's become so costly is the bureaucrat hiring spree, where the federal government added 99,000 bureaucrats over the last decade. The cost went up 73%. But here's an area that I think most Canadians are concerned about, and it's debt interest charges. I mentioned that it's already blowing a $1 billion hole in the budget every week, but let me put that further into context, okay? So every dollar you paid in federal sales tax went to pay interest on the debt last year. Or think about it this way: the federal government is now wasting more money on interest charges than what it sends to the provinces in health transfers.
And what do you make of the argument that the government has spent more given the economic turmoil caused by the Trump administration and tariffs?
Well, look, the federal government is always spending more, right? Even before the pandemic in 2018, the federal government was spending all time highs, even after accounting for inflation and population growth. So even before the pandemic, the federal government was spending more money in 2018 than what it did during any single year during World War II. Then COVID comes along, and the federal government uses a cloud of a pandemic to go on a debt fueled spending spree. And now you fast forward to today, and it looks like the Carney government is continuing the Trudeau government's debt fueled spending spree. So, look, I mean, we're looking at deficits in the $60 billion, $50 billion range. There comes a time where it's enough is enough. Canadians just can't afford these politicians' out of control spending sprees.
And what about spending on defense? There is a substantial increase coming, but is that a good use of taxpayers' money?
Well, that's a great question, right? And it's a huge amount of money. And as I mentioned before, look, if Mr. Carney is going to announce a massive increase in spending, then Mr. Carney also has to find savings in other areas of the budget, because the government can't keep running up the credit card, making even more payments on interest. Like, that is just unsustainable. And it also goes to the point of why we need a federal budget ASAP, right? Canadians deserve to know the true state of the finances. How much money is the government borrowing? And let me just add one more thought here on these overall targets, right? You hear 2% of GDP. Well, why is it only that it's government which measures success by how much things cost rather than the outcomes they achieve?
And how can the government strike a balance between reducing spending and still supporting Canadians who are struggling with affordability?
Well, one of the reasons Canadians are struggling so much with affordability is this: the cost of living is up because the cost of government is up, right? The best way for the government to make all areas of life more affordable is just to stop taking so much money in the first place. So if the government actually cuts spending, cuts waste, and is able to cut taxes, all areas of life will become more affordable. And I think this is what the poll shows, right? The poll is very clear. Most Canadians want the federal government to actually cut spending because Canadians are struggling with the cost of living. And Canadians know that they're paying too much tax because the government is wasting too much money.
Now, there is the new GST relief that is going to save first time homebuyers up to $240 on their monthly mortgage payments. Do you see that helping Canadians with affordability?
Oh, yeah, cutting the GST on homes, I think that's a good first step. And so is reducing the income tax rate, the lowest income tax rate, by a percentage point. Like, I think those are good first steps. But, like, look, to be quite frank, I mean, it's kind of like that is beef jerky when Canadians need a steak dinner right now. And all of that means that the federal government really has to cut spending so that it can cut taxes and provide meaningful relief even further. And that's especially the case with this potential tariff war that's going on, right? We need to make sure that Canadians have more of their own money in their pockets and that entrepreneurs aren't paying too much tax so that Canada's economy can fire on all cylinders.
But with this tariff war going on, I mean, what is the answer? How does the government support its workers and continue to help them when right now it seems like the government doesn't really know what to do?
Well, let's talk about the economy, right? The two things that our government in Canada can control is how much it taxes and spends, and also its regulatory burden. So, look, I think the federal government has to go on a massive cost saving campaign so that it can cut taxes both for individual workers, but also for Canada's entrepreneurs. And then, look, we also got to figure out how to get things built here in Canada. And that means governments, politicians, the paper pushers in Ottawa, they have to stop putting up roadblocks so that job creators can build major natural resource projects right here in Canada.
Franco, thank you so much for the time today.
Hey, thank you.